Hello, this is Crystal Porter, and I am happy to be here today. I would like to start off by thanking Jen for one, having this e-summit because I think it's definitely needed, and then two, for inviting me to be a part of it. Now, I decided to turn off my camera because I saw that it was in the way of my slides. So I hope you are okay with that. And without further ado, we're going to get started. All right, I want to start off by giving an overview of what I'm going to talk about. So I'll start off by giving the origin of curl, and I'll talk about the history of curl typing, and we'll talk about textured hair care needs and the implications of grooming textured hair. And then, believe it or not, there are some negatives to the moisture that we feel that we need. And then I'm going to leave you with some takeaways and then tell or advise in terms of what you can do to make a difference in this area of hair care and making sure that you have your needs met. And then I will be happy to answer any questions that you will have. So, my goal in doing this is just to share facts that's based on data so that you can have the healthy hair that you deserve. So let's start off by talking a little bit about the origin of curl. And just want to say that anthropologists have always given theories about evolution, and hair being a part of our evolution is no different. And so basically, we have evolved from having hair to being relatively hairless. And the loss of hair on our bodies over time was really due to the fact that we needed to thermally regulate our bodies. And having no hair would keep us cooler in the summer, but the hair on our head stayed intact. And so the Neanderthals who lived closer to the equator had darker skin and curlier hair, just to protect from the intense sun rays. But the majority of the hair that's on top of our head is there to be an insulator, and curlier hair is more insulating than straighter hair just because of the air pockets that they have. So when you're in heat and you have those air pockets and curly hair, then those sun rays, not only do they not penetrate, but they also don't, the heat from the sun don't impact you as much, but also in the winter. So anyone who's actually cut their hair, you can tell that you can get a little cold when you don't have as much hair on your head. And so it is an insulator. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the biology of the hair because you can have the theories about evolution, but thank goodness we have techniques that we can use to study hair and its formation. So I have a schematic of the hair here by Fugelman. This is a popular schematic within the industry. And even though there are a lot of components, I want to just showcase two. And that is what I have highlighted in the boxes. One is the paracortical cells, and then the other is the orthocortical cells. Now, the paracortical cells are more prevalent in straighter hair types, and the orthocortical cells, which are primarily on the outside of the hair towards the cuticle, those are more prevalent in curlier hair types. And so here you can see examples of the ortho and paracortical cells. And so here you can see that the orthocortical cells seems to be, they're larger than the paracortical cells. And then as you have more curl in hair, you can see that the paracortical cells are even smaller. That is important for our next slide because what was very popular in terms of what was thought until more research was done is they thought that the shape of the follicle would dictate the shape of the hair. And so what DeBow did in his publication in 2005, he let us know that hair shape is really programmed within the bulb. And so more research has been done, and you can see that Wortman has given even more of a perspective about the structural differences due to the different cell types, together with lateral segregation. And those are the main driving factors for curl formation. And then we can't forget about genomics, because as we get more tools to research things, we're able to get even more knowledge. And so there is a role of trichohyalin, and that is a gene that is associated with straight hair in Europe, or straighter hair in Europe. But they were also able to do other genomic research, and they found a single nucleotide polymorphism in 2 formation for hair genes that are related to the thickness of hair fibers that are in Asia. And so there are characteristics that are pretty much well known, and I want to go over them just to set the tone. The first is the degree of curl. So when you factor in hair from Asia and compare it to, I would say, the extreme tightness of hair that can be found in Africa, then you can see that the degree of curl goes from straight to curly. And you can also see a trend when it comes to the cross-sectional area of the fiber, where Asian hair tends to be more circular or round, and then as you go through the ethnic groups, hair of African descent tends to be more elliptical. And then looking at the cross-sectional area, you can see that Asian hair tends to be the largest, and then it varies through the other ethnic groups. Now, what is unfortunate, but when you take the average of all the hair, you could see that there tends to be a trend where there is increasing fragility in going from straighter hair types to those that are more curly. Now, there are some characteristics that are not known a lot in the public, and so I wanted to go over those, especially when we're talking about the characteristics of different ethnic groups, which is the first way that scientists studied the hair because it was just the easiest way to do it. And so for Asian hair, there are more cuticle layers. So if you can envision them as shingles on a roof, you can see that the stack of shingles, you have more stack on Asian hair compared to hair of African descent. And then you can see this little crimp here in hair. But usually within these areas, you actually have less cuticle layers, so it can be uneven, even going around the fiber. Now, the other thing that you can see is the edge to edge distance. So if you look at this cuticle edge and then next to the adjacent one, then you have tighter spacing in Asian hair, and then it gets increasingly further apart when you go from Caucasian hair then to African hair. And you can see the mean distances here. And the implications for having these structural differences is if you have less protection of the cuticle, then you are apt to have more porous hair. And so the response to treatment may be faster, and you actually may get a more severe reaction as well. And I hate to say severe, but it'll happen faster, and then the magnitude of the treatment may be greater. Now, there are also differences in hair growth. So I remember when I was young, we go around and say, man, your hair grew really fast. And so we really didn't realize when we were talking to people who were Caucasian that there is some truth as to why that is. It appeared that way, and there are facts here to show that when you take hair fibers from the continent of Africa, the continent of Asia, and then Europe, you can actually see differences in the growth rate. And so African hair seems to grow the slowest, and then Asian hair tends to grow faster, and then hair in Europe is in between. And then looking at the hair density, that is how many hair fibers there are within a square area of your head, then African hair is the least dense, meaning that it has less hair fibers. Asian hair is not statistically different than African hair, but it is a little bit higher, but it's the highest for those who live in Europe. Now, our curl characteristics can give us a variety of looks, and we describe them in various ways. And I think, this speaks to our personality, how we feel, and I want to just kind of go over the different ways we describe our hair. Some of them are terms that you've heard. Zigzag is something that Oprah's stylist Andre Walker has defined as a particular type of hair. But then I included two terms that I just want to give a little bit of attention to because kinky is a way of describing hair, and personally is one that I like because if I take my hair fiber and I look at it under a microscope, I can see kinks. So it's tight and kinky because that is the descriptor that I would use based on what I see under a microscope. However, some people can view use of that word as being more inappropriate. And I have the word nappy in red because I have heard people use it. And while I'm not as easily offended, I would say that you could use that at your own risk because in this day and age, I would say it's probably in the same bucket as the other N word. So use that at your own risk. But it seems as though there is this umbrella term for all of these words or descriptors, and that is textured hair. And so, in talking about textured hair, there are a number of studies or consumer science reports that have come out. And they say that 65% of women would categorize their hair as textured hair. And I believe it really is an umbrella term that just by default is in existence. But there hasn't been like a formal way of introducing it. I think just people just assume they know what it is. But 80% of women who are buying products on the market for textured hair. So what that means is if it says it's marketed for textured hair, then that is what 80% of the women are buying. They're making sure that they get that particular descriptor. Now, these consumers feel really special, and so they are purchasing more than non-textured consumers because if they consider their hair to be curly or coily, they're shopping even more. So it's more than just spending more money. It's about saying, hey, I need something else because what I'm using isn't working for me. Or I'm using so much of it, I need more. And so these types of trends must have really resonated with Andre Walker because he came up with a curl typing system to help consumers to understand what they should be buying in terms of what products they need. And so his curl classification started at type 1 and 2 and having three subcategories under 1 and 2, and then types 3 and 4 only had two. Now, I have to say that I am finding that this system of classifying hair has been modified over the years, and I want to talk a little bit about that because I think that it kind of changes or confuses a lot of consumers because a lot of people think that Andre Walker had three types, and maybe he did evolve to that, but based on my records, this is what I have. And so people can let me know otherwise, but it's hard to find more information out because I'm finding that a lot of the websites are changing. And so one of the modifications was done by Naturally Curly, and they started the classification at 2. So you have to recognize that there had to be a 1, but they also kept the three subcategories for type 2 hair, and they consider it to be wavy hair. Now, there are others who are coming along to make their own designations with their own pictures, but one thing I have to say about the Naturally Curly designation is it looks as though they took care to make sure that they had models who wore their hair and let it equilibrate or let it just fall natural to its normal shape. Whereas I think some of these models that they have here who are celebrities, I think they just got them off the red carpet and they're styling their hair, and I think it's very misleading. So just keep that in mind when you're looking to classify your hair, that you have a reference point that is a baseline where they are not manipulating their hair or they're not adding styling products. But unlike Andre Walker, Naturally Curly has a 3C, and then they also have a 4C as well. Now, with this classification, as you can see, there are nice, pretty pictures, but sometimes as scientists, we want to have the ability to be more objective in the way that we describe things. And so L'Oreal had an initiative where they went worldwide and incorporated over 2,400 people from all over the world, and they based it on measurements, and they did not refer to racial heritage. Like when I started this presentation, I intentionally used the racial background just because that is the way hair was characterized, and we know the most about hair just looking from that lens. So when you differentiate the hair in different curl classifications, you have different measurements that you can take. So based on experience and based on feedback from other scientists, what they did was they had different parameters that they used. So the curl diameter, which is the measure of the smallest curve in hair of a 6 centimeter long hair fiber, when it was when it was less than 1.2 centimeters, then it broke out into these 4 classifications. And that was based on making these measurements, the number of waves, and then it was also called something called a ratio. The number of waves is taking the hair fiber from 5 centimeters and then end-to-end distance, shortening it to 4 centimeters and counting the number of waves. And the ratio is taking that 6 centimeter fiber, laying it flat, and then measuring the end-to-end longest distance. And so based on that, they were able to put it into a model, and the hierarchical ascendant classification spit out 8 different categories. And so the number or the ratio here, after you had a curl diameter that is less than 1.2 centimeters, you took that measurement and it broke it out into less than 5.9 for waves for 3 and 4, where we'll break out 5 and 6. And then the other waves would be 7 and 8. So this was a way that we could look at hair fibers and not be subjective in terms of having an opinion about whether or not one person believes it's one and the other. Is always based on a measurement. Now, this objective approach seems to be still used by scientists in the industry, and there are other scientists working to continue to make objective measurements because it seems to be important for us to be able to understand the behavior of hair to develop better products. When they did the classification, they were able to get a histogram or a distribution of curl types. And oftentimes I'm asked if this is a true representation of the hair types within these particular regions. And I have to say that we need to be careful with that, because sometimes when you have people who you're asking to participate in the study, the ones who have the tightest hair or the curliest hair, they tend to want to hold on to those fibers and not participate. So while it is a nice representation of what was collected, I would say that it may not be a true representation, but it at least allows us to get an idea of the different variety of curls. Now, those with the tightest curls have the most needs, and that was illustrated by a report that was just issued a few weeks ago called the Texture Gap. And Winnie Awa, she was able to head up this study, and she found a number of things. So she used more than 10 million data points to learn that those with tight fore hair, they're driving conversations more than 8 times more than their counterpart, and they're more than 2 times likely to have problems with breakage. And then they had 4 more concerns, more so than people who had type 2 hair. And in the end, their needs weren't being met, and that included some of the hair loss conversations that they were having. So for this particular, for the remainder of this presentation, I'm actually going to talk about hair breakage, because hair loss is, I think we can have a week-long seminar on hair loss. So hair breakage is, I think, a nice start, especially since that is a major concern for curlies and coilies. So sometimes you take your hair, and I did this for exaggeration here, but you can see this comb, and it's a fine-tooth comb, and you can see the hair fibers actually getting stuck here. And that was intentional, just to show that, or illustrate that you can definitely see that it is more difficult to comb through coily or curly hair type. And so that can be illustrated here with a force diagram. This is a combing diagram. So the top of this swatch here, if you start combing the hair and you measure the force that it takes to comb through, you can see it's a tangle here, and then it finally peaks as it gets to the end, and then it finally falls off after the comb gets through the hair. So of course it's easier to comb through straightened hair. That really isn't any news, right? And this is also not any news because relaxer usage, meaning this is a treatment that you can do to straighten your hair. And if you relax your hair, and most other treatments like color as well, you decrease the strength in hair. And this is something that you can measure when you take a hair fiber. So you can imagine this is a hair fiber here, and you have it pulled, and I'm going to show, hopefully it'll work, and then it'll snap. And so when it snaps, the force that it takes to break the hair, you can measure here. So that's what the break stress is. And so virgin hair is actually stronger than relaxed hair. For this particular example, there's a reduction of 37%. Given that information, there is a curly hair paradox, and it is this. Is it better to have stronger hair that is more difficult to manage, or weaker hair that's easier to comb? Because we saw that the forces when you have straightened hair go down, you can hardly see it on the baseline here. And then we already established that as the curl degree gets higher, hair fragility goes up. Also, relaxed hair is weaker. There was this quick and dirty experiment that was done. Wasn't too sophisticated at all, so anyone can do this. And basically there were 250 milligram swatches that were 7 centimeters long. And I just want to give you the setup for how it was done in a quick way. So there were 2 hair samples. One was curlier and one was straightened, as you can see. And there were slower rates for the virgin hair. So this hair swatch right here was combed slowly or slower, because you would never just force a comb through curlier hair types. The fibers were spread out to decrease tangling, and more lubricating oil was used when making the comparison. And so we wanted to make it semi-realistic, and so virgin hair actually had more oil compared to the relaxed. And here are the results. So in looking at the hair that was broken, so this untreated curly hair, broken fibers here, you can see that when you did not have any lubrication, you can see a lot of breakage. And so it was done over a course of 7 days. When you added the oil, you still had breakage, but it was still a significant amount. However, even though the hair was relaxed and straightened, you can see that even with no lubrication, and keep in mind it had less lubrication than the hair that was curly, you did get some breakage, but not nearly as much. And then when you added lubrication, you can see that there was no breakage at all. That shows that you can actually have less breakage with weaker hair. And that is not always the thought process. Now, let me add that I am not advocating that people relax their hair. I do not have my hair relaxed, and I would not advocate for people to do it. I just want people to know that when your hair is in a straighter shape or configuration, that sometimes it's easier to get through. What you had there was on the previous slide was an example of another tensile test that showed that Caucasian hair had a higher break force than naturally curly hair, and it was 9% higher when you did a comparison. And so there is another way that you can evaluate the strength in hair, and that is what's called a cyclic fatigue test. And basically what you're doing is applying low-level forces on the hair. Let me see if I can get this video started. And so if you look carefully, you can see that moving up and down. So you can see that low-level loads are being applied to this hair fiber. And basically that allows us to get what I consider to be durability. And so looking at virgin Caucasian hair, you get This number here is the number of cycles that you can go through in pulling before the hair actually breaks or fails. So for virgin Caucasian hair, you can see 37,000. And then virgin African hair, you can see that it actually decreases at the exact same force to 5,500. Now, this is work that was completed by Trevor Evans at Textile Research Institute. And what he did was gradually increase the load that he put on the hair for on African hair samples. And you can see that the cycles to break actually went down a lot. Just going an increase of 50%, you can actually see a exponential decrease in the cycles to fail. So it's catastrophic here. But what he wanted to show here, and it actually goes with what I showed with the quick and dirty hair combing study. If you have straightened hair fibers, so he compared it to relaxed hair fibers, but then he decreased the stress, you can see that the cycles to fail or the durability of the hair actually increased. So when you have less forces, when you have either straightened hair, meaning that, it doesn't tangle as much, or you use lubrication, then you can increase the cycles to break or the durability of the hair. And this is something that he published and spoke at a conference. Now, I also wanted to talk a little bit about wet and dry combing forces, because we talk about how much our hair needs moisture. And I wanted to just kind of give you a visual of what can happen. So we have curl type 1, which is straight hair, and then curl type 5, which is not super curly, but curly enough for you to see that there are high forces when you comb through the hair. So this is dry, so it's just like the other one that we saw. So high combing forces, and then when it's wet, you can see that it goes down. So wet hair, when combed, actually has fewer forces. It takes fewer forces, which is why we always want our hair to be moisturized, because it's more manageable. But when you look at the straight hair, the blue and the yellow, you can hardly see it. So let's blow that up a little bit. So here we have hair that's wet, but it's higher in forces to comb through compared to the dry hair. So that's the complete opposite when looking at curlier hair. So what are the implications with that? Well, you have to be extremely careful when combing through dry hair, but we already established that when the hair is straight, it's easier. And so oftentimes we want to comb through our hair in its wet state, but there are implications because too much moisture could be detrimental. And once again, looking at how the hair fiber will break when you pull it, there's an area called the Young's modulus that you can measure within like the elastic region of the hair. And so you always want it to be able to snap back. But the ability for it to snap back goes down as you add more and more moisture. And so it deforms more readily as the relative humidity increases. This is just a table, and once again, it is that strength test or the tensile test. And basically, it's a comparison of dry hair here at 65% relative humidity, and then wet hair here at 100 relative humidity. You can see these values here, or the force that it takes to break the hair, is higher than when it's wet. So it's almost a conundrum, right? It's like, okay, it's easier to comb, but it's weaker. And so I would tend to think that it's probably a curl paradox number 2, because you need to know that there's a delicate balance. So I'm sharing this because I feel that us curlies and coilies really don't understand the implications of what we do, especially when we say that we want moisture. And so the last thing that I want to talk about is heat, because sometimes we always want products that are going to add moisture, but sometimes that moisture will stay in the hair even if we want to straighten it. And so the average thermal appliances usually work around a range of 150 to 232 degrees C. When it's wet, what's called the denaturation temperature, that is when you basically have hair that has been changed to the point of no return. So you never want to go above this. And so the denaturation temperature when it's dry is 235 to 250. So we're good as long as the hair is dry. But when it's wet, it decreases. And so if you put hair or if you use a flat iron on hair that has that moisture that you're always looking for, you can actually be I can't even say, denaturing or degrading your hair. And so you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that your hair is all the way dry, and there are plenty of references to show how detrimental that could be. So I hope I shared information that you can take with you and start applying in your routine. And so my takeaways is that you definitely are not crazy. Textured hair definitely does have unique needs. And then the curlier or the coilier, the more TLC is needed. Now, elongated hair, whether it be straightened with a relaxer, straightened with heat, or just elongated, you have less tangles and that results in less breakage. And then wet hair combing, you need to definitely handle with care. So that's that TLC as well. You should use lubricating products before elongating your hair. And then styling and drying your hair. Definitely use low temperature appliances. So the lowest temperature to get the effect that you need. And lastly, what you can do. Definitely use a good rinse out and leave in conditioner. Now, Barbara Bernardi will be on, I believe she joins us at 11:20 Eastern Time. And so she will be able to talk a little bit more about formulation. So don't miss out on that. Also, don't go for the okie doke and have whatever manufacturer who's making the product just list ingredients that are beneficial. You want to make sure that they test the product, the final product, on hair types that are like yours and that they showcase the results. Also, right in line with that is demand more. Support the brands that support you and the type of hair that you have. Find a trusted professional for styling and or advice. And I know that's probably easier said than done, but always look for someone who is licensed or at least has current education because some states don't require you to keep up on your license or get continuing education, but those who do it on their own are those are the ones you will most likely have success with. Find a trusted researcher and participate in studies because the only way that we can help those who are in need, which are according to the stats, the 4C consumer are the ones in need. Well, you can't be hiding out. You need to let us find you so that we can help and learn more so products can be made for your specific needs. And then lastly, follow Jen on the Echo Well. I know you heard about this presentation and maybe you're joining, but if you don't follow, definitely follow. And there are others like her as well. So be sure to seek out the ones who have information and the expertise to be able to share advice or give you the real deal. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much. And this is my contact information, and I am here to answer any questions you may have. Thanks so much.